This is why we don't show ourselves in the sunlight. People would know that we're different. It's like diamonds. You're beautiful. Beautiful. This is the skin of a killer, Bella. I'm a killer. I don't believe that. It's because you believe a lie. It's a camouflage. Everything about me is designed to kill. I'm the world's most dangerous predator. Everything about me draws you in. My face, my eyes, even my smell. And as if I would need that. As if you could outrun me! As if you could fight me off. Hi! Hello! I bet you thought the intros couldn't get dumber. And yet, here we are. So a few months ago, I did a video about Twilight books for grown-ups. And as part of that video, I had to sort of like re-jog my memory about Twilight and like what happened in it. And since then, I have had the Twilight saga quietly simmering away in the back of my head. And I came to the conclusion that the series, particularly its timeline and the lore surrounding the actual vampires, is quite literally insane. Now let me tell you, I was a Twilight girl, okay? Like when I say that, I mean I was involved. I can probably attribute at least 90% of my brain rot and just generally the way I am as a human being to this series and the fundamental impact it had on me as a small child. I dedicated an insane amount of hours to this series. I read the books themselves multiple times. I went to see the first movie six times in the cinema, and I waited for like, I want to say 8 hours outside the theater for the midnight screening to get a good seat. So when I say I am an aficionado, or at least I was, I'm retired now. I was a brave soldier fighting in the trenches, and I earned my stripes. So suffice to say, I'm a fan, okay? I'm a weathered woman. I've seen things. I have been to war. I have fought long and hard for this series, and honestly, I will die on the hill that it's a must read. I will also die on the hill that the first movie in particular is like a camp cinema masterpiece, and I'm actually so upset that Catherine Hardwicke didn't direct the whole series and that the second movie just kind of turned into like typical Hollywood blockbuster. The first movie is chef's kiss, don't touch a hair on its head. When I initially started writing my notes for this video idea, I was basically just going off memory and just pulling little nuggets from the depths of my brain rotted memory. But then I decided, no, let's do this properly. Let's start researching. And I think once I actually started researching, I was reminded by how cooked and strange this series is just as a whole. I can almost guarantee it's so much weirder than what you remember. Like we all remember the like, you better hang on tight spider monkey.
You better hold on tight, spider monkey.
And like, Bella, where the hell have you been, Loca?
Bella! Where the hell have you been, Loca?
We all remember that, but I want to really dissect. I want to get into the series and do a real deep dive into the unhinged lore that is the Twilight literary and cinematic universe. So let's get into it. Just quickly before we get into it though, I'm sorry, I gotta do the thing, like, subscribe, leave a little comment, because do you know what? It sounds so annoying when YouTubers say this, but it like genuinely helps a lot. Like the algorithmic monster just wants to like nibble up all your little likes and interactions. So the more you interact, it helps the channel. It's a free way to do it. You know, it's my birthday in a couple of days, so that can be your birthday gift to me, to leave a comment. Tell me that you better hang on tight, spider monkey, because the depression will be leaving me shortly, and strap on in for the video. So for this video, I'm mainly going to be focusing on the first book in terms of like the actual lore and timeline of the book, because we do have Midnight Sun, which is Twilight from Edward's perspective, which kind of gives us like a little bit more of a deep dive into like Edward's psyche. And I'm gonna dive into the, like, do a really rough timeline of the entire series just to really hammer home how insane the timeline is and how quickly all the events of the, not just the first book, but the entire series happen, because it's like batshit insane. And I'm also going to go into the lore surrounding like the vampires themselves, because that is also truly cursed. So let's begin. Let's take a walk down memory lane. Okay, the year is 2005. The GFC has not happened yet. We've all effectively learned how to spell bananas thanks to Gwen Stefani's Hollaback Girl. I'm 13. I'm in my first year of high school. Life is good. But to give further context, we have to push back even further. The year is 2001. I am 9. The second plane has just hit the Twin Towers, and this is witnessed by none other than a young Gerard Way, who then goes on to form a little band that you may have heard of called My Chemical Romance. This is legit, by the way. I'm not making this up. The 9/11 to Twilight pipeline is like a real thing. So Gerard Way witnesses 9/11. He's so traumatized by this event. To help deal with his PTSD from witnessing 9/11, he starts a band. It's called My Chemical Romance. An author called Stephenie Meyer is listening to My Chemical Romance and feels inspired and sort of like formulates an idea around like the MKR release, and from the ashes of Gerard Way's PTSD rises the phoenix that we know and love as Twilight. That's correct. There is a distinct, well, I mean, if you want to get technical, there's a distinct 9/11 to 50 Shades of Grey pipeline, because 50 Shades of Grey is like a fanfic of Twilight, but that's a whole other video. 50 Shades of Grey is its own insane thing. So 2005 marks the release of the first Twilight book, with one book being released per year after that. I don't remember how I stumbled across Twilight initially. You know, how did we even find things pre-TikTok, pre-social media? But I remember being obsessed. Like, I am 13, my frontal lobe is not even close to being fully developed. I'm awkward, I am scared of boys, and the thought of a beautiful, rich, gorgeous man just like sweeping me off my feet is just, you know, that's too much for my little brain to cope with. I live and breathe this book. I have an I Heart Edward shirt. I get in violent arguments about Team Edward versus Team Jacob. I stare out my bus window while it's raining and listen to Decode by Paramore and just picture the day that Edward is going to come and sweep me off my feet. To say I was a fan, an understatement. It was my personality for a good couple of years. So for those who may not know, for those who are existing under a rock, Twilight is about a young girl called Bella Swan who moves back to her like childhood town and meets a man called Edward Cullen, who she finds out is a vampire, and then they fall head over heels in love, and, you know, trouble ensues. Edward, you know, tries to work through his desire to rip out Bella's throat, and Bella is trying to move through her tendency to be the most annoying human being alive. So let's get into the timeline now of the Twilight universe. Bella moves back to her dad's house in Forks, Washington on January 17th, 2005, the day after she starts school and meets a boy called Edward Cullen in her biology class. A little bit over a week later, on January 25th, Bella is almost hit by a car, but Edward saves her. He then ignores her for almost a month. Like, straight up no contact. But we do know from Midnight Sun that on March 2nd, Edward sneaks into Bella's room to watch her sleep for the first time. Not creepy at all. March 3rd, they sit together for lunch for the first time. This is not included in the movies as far as I remember. Like, they have this in the book, they have this scene where they sit together at lunch and it's like the talk of the school and everyone's losing their shit. So March 5th, Bella sees Jacob, who tells her about this legend of the Cold Ones. And the same night, Bella has a dream about Edward being a vampire. March 8th, Bella goes shopping in Port Angeles and is nearly gang raped, which is a fact that the book is so casual about, is actually really nuts. Like, Stephenie? Anyway, Edward shows up, and because he can like hear their thoughts, he follows them and he rescues her. And that's when he admits to her that he can hear everyone's thoughts but hers while they're having dinner at a restaurant. By March 9th, they are in love. Ride or die would jump off a cliff for each other love. a whole 50 days after they have actually locked eyes on each other, and like 30 of those days Edward spent ignoring her. I think they've spoken like 4 times in total in this period of time. March 12th is the meadow scene. That's when Edward takes Bella to his like favorite spot and she sees him glisten or whatever. March 13th is where the big showdown kicks off. So that's like literally a day later. That's when Edward introduces Bella to his family. They play baseball, they meet James, and by March 18th, Bella wakes up in the hospital. 60 days. The first book takes place over the course of 2 months. Less than 2 months. These two 17-year-olds are like head over heels in love after 2 months. 1 month of which they didn't speak. So a month. They've had like 4 conversations at this point. It's actually insane. Okay, so I'll give you a speed run of the next few books because I really just want to emphasize how batshit insane the timeline of these books are. So September 13th is Bella's 18th birthday. She crashes out over being old. Same girl. September 16th is when Edward leaves and the main events of the second book kind of take place. Bella then proceeds to go and give in to her depression demon for like the next 3 months. Literally, she spends the next 3 months.
Is it me? Am I the drama? I don't think I'm the drama. Maybe I am.
We now cross into the year 2006, so a year pretty much has passed since the first book started. 1 year. Bella goes to the movies with Jessica January 16th. She then enlists. This is when she has her like first vision of seeing Edward when she gets in danger. Her brain literally hallucinates the man that left her, and these books are insane. She then enlists Jacob to help her fix some motorbikes on January 18th. We then get to see Bella and Jacob's friendship growing slowly, which is actually like kind of sweet. Like Bella and Jacob's friendship was I have the itchiest eye. It was actually kind of sweet, and I can kind of see why people rooted for Jacob. Jacob goes full wolf and admits this all to Bella on March 11th. March 16th, Bella throws herself off a cliff. As you do. Edward calls her house. They have the miscommunication. He thinks she's dead. March 20th, so 4 days after that, is when Edward and Bella are reunited in Italy, and then the third book sort of kicks off on May 14th. So we have all the stuff with Victoria and the newborn army and the wolves teaming up with the vampires, blah, blah, blah. June 13th, Edward proposes. June 15th, the big battle thing happens. We then move into the last book. Not even 2 full calendar years since Edward and Bella have locked eyes on each other. Not 2 years have passed. August 13th, Edward and Bella are married. They pulled that together so quickly. August 31st, they cut their honeymoon short because Bella realizes she's pregnant with Robitussin, and September 10th, Renesmee is born. September 13th, Bella wakes up as a vampire, and December 31st, the war with the Volturi happens, and that's kind of where the events of Breaking Dawn come to an end. Less than 2 years! Less than 2 years. I know in real life, people can meet and fall in love and get married and have kids in less than 2 years. Like, in terms of the timeline, it's unrealistic but not impossible. But lest we forget, these are one 17-year-old. Honey, you have not seen the world. Your your brain is not fully developed. You're still cooking up here. What do you... So in the span, I did the math. In the span of 1 year, they spend 1 month not being a couple but being interested in each other. 5 months in total as a couple. This is not like, what's the word? One after the other. This is like split up. So 5 months as a couple, 6 months broken up and completely separated with 0 communication. And then they live happily ever after. Crazy. So now that we've covered off the timeline of the first book, let's get into the characters, because some of this is also just like, what the fuck. In my opinion, Carlisle is like one of the most interesting and simultaneously least interesting characters in the Twilight universe. Like, he is quite literally an integral player in like the formation of like the vampire family, the Volturi, but is also just like such a boring pariah that he's not interesting. So Carlisle was born in the 1640s in London to a pastor father who quite literally was like a vampire hunter. When his father dies, Carlisle takes over his legacy, and he is tracking a group of vampires in like the sewers of London, and that's when he's captured and turned. What makes him the most bland vampire in the world is the fact that he manages to have like a supernatural grasp on his thirst like right from the get-go, and he never kills anyone ever. Boring. Anyway, he hangs out with the Volturi, blah 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 blah. He saves Edward from Spanish influenza, blah 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 blah. He saves Esme from a suicide attempt, blah 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 blah. Carlisle's power is his compassion. He's boring, I don't care. Esme is potentially even more boring, even though she actually kind of has one of the more interesting backstories. Stephenie Meyer just really went, I don't give a fuck. Esme lived a relatively normal life until she lost a child to lung disease, and then she attempted suicide and failed, but she's kind of like on the brink, and that's when Carlisle sees her and recognizes her as the grown version of a kid he treated for like a broken leg or something. They like met in past. Anyway, her power is like being a good mum. Okay. Emmett also has a super equally boring backstory. He was just like some guy who gets mauled by a bear, and then Rosalie like smells it and saves him, and the end. Stephenie Meyer really stretching the imagination muscles with that one. My personal favorite, and the Cullen that I would like tread on the most relatives to get a full on like backstory prequel for, is Rosalie. So Rosalie, when she was alive, was a rich socialite who like desperately wanted like the trad wife fantasy. Like she wanted to be a wife, she wanted to be a mum, like a proper 1920s housewife. She had a very short courting period with a man named Royce, and then they're due to wed. One night she goes to visit her friends and she's walking home alone, and she stumbles across Royce, who is with a bunch of his friends, and they're really drunk, and they like violently assault her and beat her almost to death, and then just like leave her in the gutter. Whoa. Carlisle like smells all the blood, and he rescues Rosalie. And the crazy thing about Carlisle is he literally turns Rosalie, condemns her to a life of living eternally as a vampire because he wants to like matchmake for Edward. He initially turns Rosalie because he thinks she'd be a good match for Edward, and Edward's like sad and mopey because he was also condemned to an eternal life as a vampire against his will. You know, Carlisle just really like bringing people together. Edward is kind of like understandably annoyed because he's like, Dad, why did you bring this grumpy bitch home and like force her into a life of eternity where she's inevitably gonna resent me and hate me because you did this for what? Anyway, Rosalie goes to live with the Cullens for a little bit, and then she decides she wants to like enact her revenge fantasy, which we love, like girl boss, gatekeep, gaslight. So she basically hunts down the men that had attacked her one by one, leaving her ex for last, so like he knows she's coming. And then he's like locked himself in this like bomb-proof room, and she breaks into the room and kills him wearing a wedding dress. If that is just not... That's icon behavior, honestly. And she also makes sure to not, while she's doing all of this, she doesn't spill a single drop of blood because she doesn't ever want to lose control and drink their blood and like have them be a part of her in any way, which like, badass. So her revenge plot is now complete. She goes back to live with the Cullens, and then eventually she meets Emmett and they fall in love and live happily ever after. Rosalie's power is basically being super hot. Like that's essentially her power. Her power is she is incredibly hot. She's like the most beautiful woman that's ever existed, and that's all she gets. Jasper Hale, aka Jasper Whitlock, a major in the Confederate Army. Yikes. Stephenie, you could have picked so many things, and yet you picked that. I am not American. I'm also not a Civil War expert because like why would I be? But my understanding of the Civil War and like the Confederate Army was like one side was like, we think owning people as property and slaves is bad, and the other side was like, fuck you. So even though Stephenie Meyer never mentions it, in my head it's canon that Jasper is super racist and probably owns slaves, but I digress. So he was turned as a 20-year-old by a vampire called Maria, who basically enlisted him as her like personal commander to build a newborn vampire army. Jasper eventually becomes depressed with constantly having to kill people, turn them into vampires, and then kill the vampires, because he's an empath, so he can like feel all the emotions of everyone he kills. In 1948, he leaves Maria, he runs away, he goes to a diner where he meets Alice, who has been like waiting for him because she had a vision of him and her living happily ever after. So then 2 years later, they track down the Cullens and they go and live that life. But things are pretty kind of like calm with everything. Like Jasper is just like struggling to get his thirst under control. And then Edward and Bella meets, and Edward saves Bella from getting hit by a car. And then Jasper is like, we should kill her. She's a danger. Jasper just goes like full Dexter, and he's like, murder the 17-year-old teenage girl. Jasper's power is to manipulate people's emotions. And one of the interesting things about Jasper that the movie does not touch on at all, like I get that they have to cut things for time, but the book talks about that one of the most noticeable things about Jasper, not so much for humans but for vampires with their like vampiric sight, is the fact that he's covered in scars from the newborns biting him, because like vampire venom is the only thing that can hurt another vampire. So when Bella is turned into a vampire in Breaking Dawn and sees Jasper for the first time through her newly vamped eyes, she says, now that I could see, the scars were Jasper's most dominant feature. It was hard to take my eyes off his ravaged neck and jaw. Hard to believe that even a vampire could have survived so many sets of teeth ripping into his throat. Instinctively, I tensed to defend myself. Any vampire who saw Jasper would have had the same reaction. The scars were like a lighted billboard. Dangerous, they screamed. How many vampires had tried to kill Jasper? Hundreds? Thousands? The same number that had died in the attempt. Okay, Jasper. All right, Confederate racist. Okay, so let's get into Alice Cullen, my angel, my Shayla, my sweet baby. Alice was born in 1901 in Mississippi to like a pretty regular, like upper middle class nuclear family. As a human child, Alice would have dreams and visions and is like eventually committed to an asylum because she accurately predicted the murder of her mother, and then she kind of like accidentally uncovered a plot by her father to like murder her mum and then marry this new woman. Anyway, the new stepmother tries to kill her and that doesn't work, so she gets committed, as any good woman in the 1900s did. She undergoes electroshock therapy, which gives her like amnesia, and it's at the asylum that she meets another vampire and they become friends and like buddies. And then during her time in the asylum, Alice actually has a vision that she is going to be stalked and murdered by this vampire called James, who is, yes, the same James that is in the first Twilight book. So when she has this vision, her vampire friend turns her and then sacrifices himself to like give her time to undergo the transformation so James can't kill her. And then James just like decides to leave her alone for like reasons. Alice wakes up, she immediately has a vision of Jasper and the Cullens, and then they leave and the rest is history. And finally we have our main man, Edward Cullen. He's kind of boring and kind of not. He was born in 1901, which makes our boy a Gemini. He was turned by Carlisle when he was 17 of dying of Spanish influenza. And Edward did struggle initially to like fit into Carlisle's vegetarianism. One thing that I think is really cool and interesting and actually like complex about Edward's character is his constant struggle with morality and whether or not his soul is like damned because he's like a creature of the underworld or whatever. So because he has the ability to read minds, when he's struggling with this, he decides that he's gonna like fuck Carlisle off and go full Dexter and just murder and drink the blood of like rapists and serial killers, which I actually think is a really interesting character trait and a really interesting way to play on those issues of like morality and, you know, is murder okay if you're like, you know, taking out another murderer. So those are our beloved Cullens. You get a little bit more insight into them as a unit in Midnight Sun because we get a bit of Edward's life before he meets Bella. Basically, Carlisle created like a little incestuous vampire cult and essentially condemned a bunch of teenagers to to have to live forever because he wanted to play matchmaker. Carlisle is an icon, we stand. Okay, so now let's get into what I think is arguably the most insane part of the Twilight universe, which is the actual vampires themselves and like the lore behind their physiology. Stephenie Meyer really just cooked with this one. She really truly went insane. So the vampires in this universe are essentially meant to be like irresistible to humans, which just seems like overkill considering they're also like super strong and super fast. So they smell good, they look beautiful, and it's said that even their voices have like a musical quality to them that kind of like draws you in, which as I said is like redundant because they're like really strong, really fast. They can see in the dark, they can hear and smell for miles, they don't need to breathe, so they can stay underwater for like an indeterminate period of time. They're basically like indestructible, but also just the most OP monsters ever. All of their bodily fluids are replaced with venom, which means like the liquid that moves their eyes is venom. Vampires, this is the part that I was truly like, what, Stephenie, what? Vampires can actually have their legs and arms removed, and then just like use some of their venom, like spit on their arm and like glue it back on. I'm not joking. That's actual Twilight lore. Because the venom is apparently adhesive, which then like begs the question, if the venom is adhesive, would like Edward and Bella not have stuck together every time they kissed? Like when, you know, they did the deed, if he, you know, would that have not like stuck it together? No? These are the questions that keep me up at night, truly. Anyway, so let's talk about the nightmare fuel that is Renesmee. So on her website, Stephenie Meyer has like a frequently asked questions page. There's a whole section of this FAQ dedicated to vampire pregnancy because she really like wrote herself into a corner with this one and then just like threw some shit at the wall and went, yeah, that'll do. So this is what she had to say about the ladies, which is female vampires cannot have children because their bodies no longer change in any aspect. There's no changing cycle to begin with, and their bodies couldn't expand to fit a growing child either. Which is kind of like, okay, that makes sort of sense, I guess. Then we get into the boys, and this is where she's just making shit up. Like, I know all authors are making shit up, but she's truly just making shit up. The normal reactions of arousal are still present in vampires, made possible by venom-related fluids that cause tissues to react similarly as they do to an influx of blood. Okay. Like with vampire skin, which looks similar to human skin and has the same basic function, fluids closely related to seminal fluids still exist in male vampires, which carry genetic information and are capable of bonding with a human ovum. Like, what? Stephenie, what do you mean? So that covers the basics of how like Robitussin came to be made. But now let's get into everyone's favorite freaky lore, and that is whether Jacob Black was sexually attracted to Edward. So part of the lore of Rumpelstiltskin is that Jacob was like attracted to Bella partially because the egg that had her in it was in Bella, and because he imprinted on Renesmee. It's all very stupid. So the question truly is, if vampires can't change, so theoretically the sperm that made rumination was always in Bella. It was always in Edward. So did Jacob like secretly have the hots for Edward? Was he like really sexually confused whenever Edward was around? That's what I want to know. There was this urban myth that I fully thought was like canon, but the more I researched for this video, the more I think it is just like actually an urban myth that kind of took root, was that the only reason Edward was able to impregnate Bella was because they went swimming before, and like the warm sea like warmed his ball sack up and made the sperm able to go into the... We truly live in a cursed world. So the only other fun fact that I think is really hilarious that you get from reading Midnight Sun is the story behind when Bella actually falls down the stairs. So when she's attacked by James and they have to lie and be like, oh, she fell down the stairs and fell through a window, is the fact that to do that, to break the window, Alice rolls herself up like a bowling ball and like yeets herself out the window to make it look like Bella fell, which I'm like, could we not have used a brick? That just seems like a lot of work. So to wrap up this video, I'm just going to share some of my favorite like miscellaneous Twilight canon facts in no particular order. So vampires can't eat food, but sometimes they try anyway. So they can swallow human food, but like they can't digest it. So it just like sits in their stomach and then they have to manually throw it up later. So in the first book, Edward like eats pizza to show Bella that he can, and then he has this thought in Midnight Sun where he's like, oh man, I'm gonna have to throw that up later, which is just so normal. You know, that's super normal behavior. The Volturi, who are like the vampire government, in the official guide it's revealed that the Volturi have like luxury penthouses where they just like keep women as like living blood bags, and then when they deem the women are like too old and like not cute anymore, they just like... And that's something that I don't think is like ever mentioned in the movies, probably for good reason. Twilight vampires have no body hair. So Stephenie Meyer in her like official guide stated that all the hair except the hair on their heads gets burned off in the transformation. So like, why though? So they have like no hair on their arms, no hair on their legs, no hair on the between me downstairs, if I'm to assume. But why? That's what I want to know, Stephenie. Your lore is so contradictory. Like, why? For what purpose? And because they're like marble, they actually can't get dust on them because nothing sticks to them, which is so weird. My last favorite miscellaneous fact that I'm going to leave you with is in the first movie, in the original cafeteria scene, which is something that I didn't notice until I was doing my research for this video. Emmett has a whole bag of hard-boiled eggs sitting on the table in front of him in the cafeteria, which is like, why? You can't eat. Like, I understand that they have to have like the fake cafeteria food to pretend to eat, but like, you brought in a bag of eggs? Sweetie, what are you doing? What are you doing? So I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it's a little bit different to what I usually do and there's no like recommendations, but I just love Twilight and I feel like so many things from my childhood are starting to have like a bit of a resurgence in popularity, and especially with like the rise of book talk, like people are talking about older book series and like everyone's obsessed with the Hunger Games again. So I'm like, it's Twilight's turn, baby. It's time for it to make a comeback. So that is my deep dive, unhinged recap of the Twilight cinematic literary universe, so you don't have to. I hope you have enjoyed this. I hope you're all having great weeks. As usual, don't forget to like, subscribe, don't leave a mean comment or I will cry, and I will see you in the next video.